Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. On his podcast, former Daily Show host Trevor Noah, who's allegedly a comedian, although I never picked up on it, had this exchange with a woman named Ruha Benjamin, who is a sociology professor at Princeton. And I appreciate this exchange. And I appreciate it for one reason, because it's evidence and should be a reminder to anyone who is at all intrigued by identitarian politics, that identitarian politics is the road to ruination as a nation. It is disunifying. It tears at the social fabric. And so the neo-black separatism of Trevor Noah and Ruha Benjamin.
And now I'm separating two things, because I know in America people are like, well, of course, I mean, there was racism and there was segregation. And I go, yeah, no. I'm separating them. Let's separate someone being oppressed and someone not being able to get a job and someone not being able to get a bank loan. Let's take all of those, the negative things away, because I'll put myself out personally and say, I think whether we're talking about gifted kids who are anomalous, let's say, to the norm, whether we are talking about and I mean anything that does not fit into a category. I think part of the reason Finland is able to do it is because, have you been to Finland?
It's very homogeneous.
I've been to Finland. You know who's in Finland? Finnish people. That's it. And because they're all Finnish, there's an idea of like, no, we all head in the same direction. We all know what our actions mean. And that's a really powerful thing I've learned in communicating with other people. When I'm in a room with anyone where we start to tie together multiple things. So if I'm in a room with black people, already there's like an implicit trust because we know what certain actions, words, and vibes mean. And then you're in a room with another African. Already. Now, even if you shout at me, I know what your shout means. The same way an Italian knows what an Italian shout means.
Yeah.
Right? I know I'm prefacing it with a lot because it's a loaded question.
Yes.
But I would love to know if you think integration was the right solution, maybe, on the other side of, America, of civil rights.
Yeah. No, I don't. And I don't think it's actually that controversial when, if you understand that segregation and integration weren't the only options. Like, within those two options, it may seem like integration is the more progressive. Like, of course, we don't want segregation. But again, when you're being integrated into institutions, into a culture that's a supremacist culture, that's a culture that feeds off of hierarchy, that feeds off of insecurity, anxiety, why are we being integrated into that?
Says the professor at Princeton University. This comes out of critical theory, which is also not going away by executive order. And it's another expression of this that is useful to drive the point home, if that doesn't drive it home enough. Cal State University president, the president of a university in California, Cal State University President Luke Wood, a black gentleman, makes essentially the same argument. They've got a fancy title for it. Being integrated into a power structure, institutions that don't respect you, that subjugate you, and so forth, says the Princeton professor. Says the Cal State University president, Luke Wood, the term racial battle fatigue.
And how basically being in these environments that are oftentimes inherently racist and sexist and dehumanizing, how that has an impact on you. And it immediately made me think of the work of a scholar and a good friend, Dr. William Smith, on racial battle fatigue. And I know that many of you in here are familiar with that, but if you aren't, essentially what his work does is he has created a framework for understanding the cognitive, psychological, and physiological impacts that racism has on your body, even when you are in environments that are like subtly racist. So what happens to you when you're sitting and situated in these environments, either as students or as leaders or as faculty members or staff members? What happens? And the reason that he calls it racial battle fatigue is because what he has found is that the impact that racism has on you is very similar to combat stress syndrome in terms of the characteristics and manifestations of what that looks like. So first, he says it impacts you cognitively, your ability to process information, retain information, and your focus, your attentional control. Second, he says that it impacts you psychologically, constant anxiety and worrying, anger suppression, resentment, emotional and social withdrawal. And then it also impacts you physiologically, physically. Tension headaches, backaches, elevated heartbeat, upset stomach. And so he also then shows that when those conditions are present, that it has an elevated risk of disease and cancer and other negative outcomes. And so I do think that it's...
So then racial battle fatigue, what's the treatment? A separate nation within America for blacks only, a separate place somewhere else? We didn't get the details on that. We just have the criticism and the victimization narrative. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Pastor Corey Brooks, Senior Pastor at New Beginnings Church in Chicago, Southside, founder and CEO of Project Hood as well. Corey, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, I'm glad to be on. Thanks for having me on this morning.
So, racial battle fatigue and the mistake of integration, that's what black academics are stewing about these days, can continue to be stewing about these days.
Yeah, you know, these post-60 liberalists, they continue to try to get us to believe that racial identity politics and focusing everything on race is what's going to make us successful. And that could be that's so far from the truth. That's the reason why, Dan, I'm going to be honest, with my last dying breath, I'm going to make sure I continue to fight issues like this and people like that continue to tell our community these evil lies that lead us down a road to destruction. I want people to understand in my community that, listen, we are all created equal. We all need collaboration. God made all of us. We are one people. We're the human race. We're not a black race, a white race, and we're the human race. And when we start understanding that, we can get past these idiots who say these crazy things.
Well, I mean, and the reality is we've talked about a lot, and including with Bob Woodson, your friend and ours, is that the promise of Brown v. Board of Education has never been fully realized. It's not de jure segregation anymore, but it's de facto, and Chicago is a case study in de facto segregation, and that's mainly been in the hands of the government. People in government, black, white, Latino, and other, who don't want black kids to have choices to go to school, and so they could go to school maybe in different neighborhoods than they do at present, and so forth. I mean, to truly facilitate integration and opportunity that is that transcends race, you have people that are actually the big government commissars of all races that have inhibited that.
Therein lies the problem. That's one of the issues that we're faced with in our community, that we are subjugated to these poor schools. The unions have so much control, and as a result, our children are continually being passed and forwarded along, even when they're failing. And so this idea and this mindset that these educators are trying to espouse are doing nothing but continuing the damage that's been going on since the 60s in our community. That's the reason why, I like the fact that you mentioned school choice so often, is because one of the ways that we can get out of the mess that we're in and allow our children to move beyond 4% reading proficiency and 6% math proficiency is to have school choice. We should not have our children regulated to these failing schools and a failing system. But our dependency upon government and having government parent us in our community has been a major problem.
Is that message, are those test scores you just referenced that we've talked quite a bit about, does that get through to the families in your neighborhood that you talk to? Are they aware of this? Are they aware of the performance of their their local neighborhood schools and reacting accordingly?
They're not totally aware, but I blame people like myself for that. We have to do a better job at communicating the issues and the problems that are going in our community. And not only do we need to communicate the problems, but we have to come up with the solutions. So that's one of the reasons why I'm going to start a school, one school in 4 locations, because I want to give parents the option for their children to go to a school that is performing. So although it's a parent's responsibility, I don't want to take parents' responsibility away, but it's also responsibility of community people like myself to make sure that people understand clearly what they're up against, and I don't think we've done that good enough.
You wrote in the recent op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, you want Trump to come to your neighborhood and deliver what message?
Hey, come to our neighborhood and tell us you got nothing coming, and it's either sink or swim, because for far too long we've had individuals come to our neighborhood and throw in program after program after program, only to see our neighborhood get worse and worse and worse. And I think this dependency upon government, this idea that somehow the government is going to come in and save the day, it's going to turn our communities around, the government is going to transform our communities, government is going to create more businesses, government is going to create a better school, that's a facade. And when we wake up and realize that, we are resilient, we will stand on our own 2 feet, and we will get our community together, and we'll start to transform it. But as long as we have this mindset and this idea, believing that government is going to come in and save the day, we're never going to advance as a community.
But most people in the African American community rely on government and think that they are going to save them.
Yeah, it's not just our community. It's a habit across America. This dependency upon government and big government and regulations, it's hindering us from progressing as Americans. However, I agree with you totally that we have a worse situation in our neighborhoods because it's been going on since the 60s, this dependency. And this dependency has grown and grown, and as a consequence, we see the damage that it results in our community. But the problem is we have so many people who are part of the power structure in our community that depend on government, make their life off government, make their life off of identity politics, that it's a little more difficult to change the scenario and to change the story and to get people to understand, because you have these foes who are working against that message being promoted.
Some recent polling that suggests that Brandon Johnson is not particularly popular across the board, that Stacey Davis Gates and the Chicago Teachers Union is not particularly popular across the board. We've seen some, entertaining ripping of Brandon Johnson at city council meetings by Black Chicago residents who are upset, in particular, about the spending of taxpayer dollars on people in this country illegally. But I wonder what your handle is. Is there really a revolt happening in some of these black neighborhoods, majority black neighborhoods? Are they really open-minded to getting past the blacks versus the Latinos versus the whites construct and thinking differently about local politics?
Absolutely. Now is the time, if there ever was a time, for there to be a movement across Chicago as it relates to our communities, it would be now. I think it's a perfect situation where people are starting to revolt, where people are starting to understand the magnitude of the damage that's being done in our communities. And they understand the messaging that's coming from the mayor's office and coming from other black elected officials. And that message has not done anything to advance our cause. And people are waking up to that, and they're saying, hey, there is a better way. We can do something different. And we see that in the results of so many people who voted for President Trump, higher black numbers than at any other time in the history of America. I think that's something that we need to continue to do. I think that's something that we need to continue to fight for. And we need individuals, especially, I tell my conservative friends all the time, that if you ever wanted to see transformation take place, now is the time to get involved in urban areas, unlike before, because now there is a movement of people growing every single day who want something totally different.
And how important is the migrant issue to to sort of as an accelerant to that transition?
Oh, it's a big issue because when people, it's something that people in our neighborhoods we see every day. And then when you start talking about the numbers, the more and more people are finding out they spent how much, they did what, they got what free. Those type of things start to come up, and then we look in our neighborhoods and we see deplorable schools. We see Walgreens leaving. We see McDonald's leaving. We see 63rd Street that used to be flourishing with businesses closed down, and then we realize these are things and institutions that we probably could have gotten off the ground with a lot more success, but yet those funds and monies that were needed have been allocated toward people who have been here illegally, and that definitely is making a lot of people upset. And, you know, even me, I'm a pastor and I love the Lord and I love people and I want to help the foreigner. I want to help the citizen who comes here, the stranger. It's my biblical responsibility. But I also believe that we ought to obey the laws of the land, and that no time should we be allowing people to come into America and take care of them when they've arrived here illegally.
Corey Brooks, Senior Pastor, New Beginnings Church on the South Side, founder and CEO of Project Hood as well. Corey, thanks as always.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
In 2012, the Journal of Cognition and Emotion published a study that showed that we make a decision to trust a person within 100 milliseconds of seeing their face.